Okay, so here's part 2. We're going to talk about how to identify and seize news opportunities, and also some tips on how to do media interviews. Opportunities emerge when your issue appears in the news. You're having a strike or contract dispute, or there's an assault. Your issue's in the news, so the opposition calls for actions that contradict your position. For instance, you're in the middle of contract negotiations and the management says something. Then, yeah, you're in the news then. Editorial writers or columnists address your issue. This could, same thing. It's often you're in contract negotiations and you're thinking about striking, and the editorial writers or columnists are gonna address your issue. Legislators debate your issue. This is pretty self-explanatory. Transit funding cuts, other things. And then plans for policy implementation develop. And the opposition seeks funding or public support for competing policy initiatives. So these are all reasons when these opportunities emerge for you to reach out to the media. Tools of media relations. News release advisory. This is when you're writing, it's a written thing that you could email out, letting people know of your stance or an event happening. Press conference or briefing, self-explanatory. You're on strike, or you're having contract negotiations. You want to update the media, that's what you do it on. The media interview. Doing an interview with a reporter, you're just sitting down to chat with a reporter. That's part of it, one of the tools. A media-friendly website. You want to have a good website that is media-friendly. And then social media, Facebook and Twitter. Facebook and Twitter are both two. Facebook is, as everybody knows here, is a growing thing for news and such. So you need to make sure you can do media through all these things. A good press release. I'm going to go over this pretty quickly. Needs to have a release date, contact name and phone number, which will probably be you or someone else. Headline inserting the key message. So this is the key message that you want to get out. Subhead that inserts the secondary message. This can be optional, but it should, lead paragraph that answers the 4 W's, which is who, what, where, and when. Key things. You want to get your key point across pretty quickly in this, because if it's not something they're interested in, they'll read your first paragraph and they'll throw it away or delete that email. And then guidance about where to go for more information, whether it be your website, your Facebook page, where can I get more information about this stuff? Media-friendly websites have complete contact information. So your website should have where can I get in hold of you or somebody else who needs to talk to the media. Include titles and abstracts of major reports. If you have something on there, summarize it and you can link to it. Include a bio, meaning like, let them know who you are. We are we're Local 586 who represents transit drivers and riders, or we're Local 732 in Atlanta that represents the MARTA workers. We represent bus drivers, transit drivers, Metro Access drivers. Include a few news clippings. If there are a couple stories that mention your local, include those on the website. Make sure it's easy to navigate. People know where to go. It's very simple. Can be found using keywords on major search engines. So I want to make sure if you're ATU Local 732, when somebody searches ATU Local 732, it pops up on Google. Proactive versus reactive strategy. This is in dealing with the media. Do you want to be proactive or reactive? Sometimes you do both. First, we'll go over the proactive. Which I think is more important. You're initiating media contact with phone calls, op-eds, letters to the editors, keeping key reporters informed. You don't necessarily have to have a story to meet with a reporter. You can just get to know that reporter, but that's being proactive. Invite them out for coffee. Sit down just to get to know each other. Issuing news releases, that's being proactive. If you're doing a rally, just because you do a rally, nobody's going to know you're doing it. You have to put a press release or media advisory out. Holding press conference briefings, exactly what I said. That's being proactive. Now we'll talk about the reactive, which is sometimes what you need to be. Letters to the editor. Letters to the editor is reacting to a piece you see in the news or on the news. Very simple. Initiating reactive media calls. You see a story, talking about your contract campaign or something, and you don't like what that story is, reach out to that reporter, reach out to that media, whether it's print, broadcast, or online. Reach out to them. Reactive interviews, same thing. Op-ed pieces, a little more in depth. You see something that the editorial page writes in your local newspaper? Write an op-ed, and I'll give you some tips later on what entails to write a good op-ed piece. Proactive rallies, protests, demonstrations are all great proactive tactics. If you're having a contract dispute and you want to let riders know what's happening on the public, hold a rally, hold a protest. Same thing that has to do with transit cuts. Pitch calls to the emails to the media. If you are doing a rally, protest, or press briefing, you need to do calls to the local TV stations, local reporters, local radio stations, let them know that it's happening. You can send an email, you can fax them a press release, whatever, but you have to follow up with a phone call. Op-eds. I said op-eds are reactive pieces to a little bit longer an editorial being written. Emails, letters, faxes. News releases, mentioned that. And newsletters, electronic or print. Proactive ways to get your message out. And press conference and briefings, which we talked about and we will talk about later. Pitch, email, or call. Explain who you are. When you're sending an email, you're doing a call, explain who you are, why you're an expert, that we're from the transit union, and where you're from. We're from ATU Local 732, MARTA workers, or ATU Local 689, DC Metro workers, wherever you're from. Point out the newsworthiness of what you're pitching. You're only going to have a short time with this person on the phone. You're usually calling the newsroom, and you say, okay, here's why our story is important to you. Riders are facing cuts if the city budget passes, and they will lose ways to work, school, and the doctor. Straightforward and simple, concise, and clear. Tell the story to their readers. Why would their readers be interested in this? Explain, or their viewers. Explain how it relates to other stories that they've run or that are in the news. This means that you need to find out, keep track of the local media in your community and find out what are they covering and how can, this is why their people would be important. They did a story last week on somebody not being able to get to school or something about the bus routes happening. And that's why they're going to be interested in your story or why you're protesting it. Tell how and why you can be reached. Say, hey, if you ever need anything, reach out to me. Here's my cell phone. Here's my email. You can text me. You can reach out to me whenever. When to do a press conference. When you have breaking information that can't be released as effectively otherwise, that's when you do a press conference. You only really want to do a press conference when you really have something that's newsworthy, because that's sort of a boy cries wolf. If you're doing a press conference once a week, every other day or every 2 weeks, they're not going to cover it. If you're not going to be releasing anything that's really interesting or new. So you really have to be careful on what you're releasing. When your message is controversial, enough said. When your issue has broad appeal, that it not only appeals to you and your members, but to the public, to transit riders, to legislators. When you have highly visible, controversial spokespersons. And finally, when you have visuals that make good television or photos. This is why some of you have seen the ATU camel out there sometimes. You do a press conference or a rally with one of those, that's a great visual and helps to get TV out there. You need to come up with gimmicky things that people like to do and like to see on TV, and it helps. Making the most of a press conference. Open with your key message. Very important. Outline details of announcement and sub-messages. So when you're up there, you want to make sure you're getting straight to your message. Outline the announcement and any other key messages. Involve and identify key personalities, players, people who are at the local. Close by repeating key messages. So you want to say your message up top, and then you want to close, say with it at the end. Offer people or visuals to increase the likelihood of coverage. Like I was saying, do something with something gimmicky, whether it's signs, whether it's the ATU camel, or something else interesting, posters that read. It helps people to cover these things and come out there. Writing letters to the editor and op-ed pieces. Initiating reactive media calls. And responding effectively when a reporter calls. These are all important things that you need to do to react when something negative or something is in the media that you need to react to. Letters to the editor. No more than 3 to 5 short paragraphs or 150, 200 words. You got to get to this very quickly. And then there's usually, with most newspapers, there's usually an email that you can send these to, or you can mail it in an evening. Identifying the key story, triggering story in the first graph, including headline and when it ran. So if you're writing a letter to the editor, say, I'm writing this letter in reaction to this story title that ran on this day. Make key point in first or second draft. You only really have 3 or 5 short paragraphs, 150, 200 words, so you got to get your key point out there quickly. And back up the position in the remaining graph. But really, you have to be very quick. In some ways, it's harder to write a shorter letter to the editor than a longer op-ed because you have less space. Now some things on writing a good op-ed. Features attention-grabbing headlines. Same thing as a letter to the editor. You have something that's going to attract people's attention. Identifies topic in the first graph. What are you talking about? Get it out there in the first paragraph. Use facts to underscore your main point. Self-explanatory. Use a narrative voice. This is not yes, you have to say that this is coming from you and you're writing it as a piece, like a column in reaction to something. That narrative voice can often be the local union or the riders or the workers. And runs between 600 and 800 words at most. Finally, submit with a cover letter or a cover email, if you do it in an email, that identifies a writer as a credible authority on the source. For instance, tell them that you are a local union transit worker who heads up 600 transit workers in your community. Initiating reactive contact on the phone. Explain why you're calling. I'm calling because there was a story that ran recently, or that you ran a story about transit funding or about an attack on one of our members. Call only if you have a substantive addition. Don't just call just to call. Call for a reason. Be sensitive to deadlines. You don't want to call a TV news reporter at 5 o'clock when they're getting ready to do something at 6 for the 6 o'clock news. Also, don't do it a print reporter later in the day. And you may even not even do it too early in the morning when they're getting to do the morning news. Follow up with the written information. Tell them, all right, here's why I'm calling. I'm going to send you an email with more information on this subject. Via email and Twitter. Explain why you're writing in the first graph. Limit yourself to 200 words or less. Same thing. You have to do that on Twitter anyways. Identify when you're available to talk to that person in phone. Say, you know, I'm reaching out, I'm sending this information about why we disagree with this. I can be reached anytime, or I can be reached best at afternoon or whenever. Responding to media calls. If you're not prepared, and this is okay, politely explain that you're busy and that you'll get back to them and ask them when their deadline is. Very simple. Do not try and make anything up. Just tell them, I need to get back to you on that issue. I'm not sure what the answer is to that. If the question's out of your area, bring them back to your field of expertise. You can say, listen, I don't know about that, but I do know about these things. Don't be afraid to rephrase the question. So you could say, well, you know, I'm not sure why they're doing these transit cuts, but I can tell you this. Be succinct, very important. You don't want to babble on too much. And oftentimes what a reporter will do, and this is more in TV and radio, even in print, is they will ask you a question and then there'll be a silence there and it's very uncomfortable. And so the natural thing for you to do will be to keep talking. Say your message, say it clear and concisely, and then stop. Things to remember. Respect deadlines. Stay on message. Be succinct. Tell the truth. Don't be a pest. And we're going to go over some tips to prepare for media interviews.